Hey JVs, this is Gretchen here, and I'm going to go over a little bit about lesson planning. So, I really spent some time thinking about what to share with you about this, and I ultimately decided to be really technical with this piece because when I reflect on my time as a JV, this was something that I really was not prepared for. I remember the week before school started being handed this booklet of standards and being told to copy them in a notebook, and then handed a lesson planner with a bunch of words on it that I had never seen before. And so I ultimately spent a lot of time copying previous teachers' lesson plans and really not knowing what I was doing. When I ultimately went to grad school to receive my master's in curriculum and instruction, I remember sitting in class and saying, oh wow, that's what those words meant. That's what I should have been doing. So my hope is that I can shed a little bit of light on what the three basic components of a lesson plan are, and that you can use this throughout your time to go back and refer to. So the three basics of a lesson plan: the standards, the objectives, and the assessment. I had no idea what any of those were. And so I'm going to go through each of those and then go through an example with you. So first is a standard. So a standard defines what students should know and understand in specific grade levels. They're going to differ at each grade level and by each subject. One thing I want to note is that standards have been created and decided upon by the country in which you're working. You will be given these. These are something that you have no decision making in. So here in the United States, we generally, in most states, use the Common Core state standards. And so those are standards for ELA and math that have been decided upon that each student in the United States at each grade level needs to know. You're not going to know what those standards are until you most likely get in country and receive your teaching assignment. But know that this is something over which you have no control. And so this is the piece that will be given to you. So an example of a standard would be, I've listed some math ones because I am a math teacher. So understanding subtraction as an unknown add-end problem, or converting among different size standard measurement units within a given measurement system. They're usually pretty lengthy, but they're going to be right to the point of what it is that you need to be teaching your students and what it is they need to know. So, I have no idea why that's so small. You have your standards, and now you need to create your objectives. So, you're always going to start with the standard, then you're going to move to your objective. So an objective is a statement that describes what students will be able to do and or know at the end of a lesson. This is going to, you're going to have a lot of these for each standard. So you're going to have one standard and you might have 4, 5, 6, sometimes 10 objectives that go underneath that standard. We're going to talk a little bit about how to create an objective because I think that's the most challenging part of this all. So I really love the book Teach Like a Champion, and if there's any books that I would recommend to you before you leave, it would be Teach Like a Champion. It has so many things about all the pieces of teaching and really breaks it down for you. So if you're looking for a great book and you know you're going to be teaching, I highly suggest that one. So this strategy comes specifically from Teach Like a Champion, and it says that for an objective to be effective, it essentially has to follow the 4 M's, which are manageable, measurable, made first, and most important. I'm going to go through what each of those 4 things mean. So manageable. It means that the objective can be taught in a single lesson. Every single day, you should have an objective that ties back to the standard that you're teaching on. And that objective should be able to be taught in that one lesson. What this means is that when you're planning, you're going to think of the steps necessary to achieve mastery of that specific standard. The objective should then match with those individual steps. So I'm going to go through an example of that later on if that doesn't make any sense. So measurable. At the end of each class period, you should be able to determine if students achieved mastery of the objective. So you should be able to know, yes, Sally met the objective, no, Joe did not. You want to be able to think of a way that you can measure the objective at the end of each class, whether it be a question, a short activity. Objectives are not related to feelings or thoughts about a particular subject. So if you create an objective and you have no way to determine if students have met the objective, you can't measure it, then it's not a sound objective. Okay? Made first. This is something I feel very, very strongly about. A solid objective guides the day's lesson plan. It does not justify the activities done. So let me give you an example of something I've seen here at my time in the States. I've seen teachers come up with a great activity. They're like, oh my gosh, I was on Pinterest and I saw this cool geometric city and I want my students to make it. And then they go back and create an objective to match with that activity. That is not how we're going to plan, because ultimately then it leaves the standards in the dust. You want to start with the standard and then create your objective. If it aligns with a cool activity you found, great. But ultimately, it's not about the activities students are doing, it's about what they're learning. And if the learning matches what the curriculum has set out for them to learn. Lastly, your objective should be most important. It should focus on what is most important for my student to succeed. So again, you might really have wanted to have your students create that geometric city, but you should only consider having them do it if it's the best way to deepen student learning. So what I mean by that is, if students are just going to be creating this geometric city, but they're not going to learn anything from it, then it's not something that they should be doing. So let's go through an example. So once not yet. We're going to go through our assessment. So again, the assessment is just how are you going to determine if students mastered the objective? That could be through asking them questions. It could be through a worksheet. It could be having them turn and talk to their partner and you're listening. There are lots of different ways to assess. So now for today's purpose, we're going to look at the following standard. Fluently multiply multi-digit whole numbers using the standard algorithm. Okay, this is a United States standard. And because I'm a math teacher, it's just what I gravitated towards. So we're going to start out with this standard. We know that students have to multiply multi-digit whole numbers, and they have to use the traditional way of multiplying, which is what you and I were taught. So now I'm going to think about what are the skills that students need to be able to do in order to meet this standard. Well, they need to have a firm grasp of their single-digit multiplication skills. Facts, not skills. Have a strong understanding of place value, and they need to then eventually be able to multiply a multi-digit number by another multi-digit number. Those are the 3 skills. Now for each of these skills, I'm going to develop an objective. So remember, if we go back to where it says we wanted manageable objectives, we're going to think of the steps that are necessary to achieve mastery of that standard. So that's where that came into play. I have the standard. In order to make that standard measurable, I thought of all the skills that they needed. So now I'm going to look at each skill individually, and I'm going to develop an objective that goes with it. So skill 1 says have a firm grasp of multiplication facts. Okay, so now I'm going to create an objective. SWBAT stands for students will be able to. So students will be able to recall the products of two one-digit numbers by playing multiplication top it with a partner. Okay, so this is going to take place in one day. They're going to play a game. I did not go and find this game and say, great, where can I fit this in the curriculum? Nope. I started with my standard and recognized that students needed to practice their facts. So then I found something that went with that specific skill. It's really important for them to do this in order to be able to multiply multi-digit numbers. So I check off all the 4 ends with this. Lastly, I'm going to create my assessment. So how am I going to make sure that students were able to recall the products of two one-digit numbers? I'm going to ask the students while they're playing the game to write down the facts and record their answers. And then they're going to hand them in to me and I'm going to check them. That's how I'm going to assess. I'm going to see if they were able to correctly give me the answers or not. So that's essentially the rundown for making a lesson plan. I understand that this was a lot, and I went through it really quickly. I would highly suggest going back through this and watching this once you start lesson planning. But my hope is that now you know at least what those terms are, okay? And you know that a standard is something you're going to get, but that the objective and assessment, those are up to you to create, and they must match with the standard that you're teaching. Yeah, that's about it. I hope you found that helpful. Know that you can always reach out if you have questions about lesson planning. I'm happy to help out.